I called out my parents for 25 years of favoritism, and they said maybe the problem isn't with us. The ultimate family confrontation that changed everything forever. I'm Michael, 28 male, and I just discovered that no matter how hard you try to be the perfect son, some parents will always have a favorite child and it's not you. Christmas. Morning started like any other holiday in the Johnson household. The smell of cinnamon rolls filled our childhood home in suburban Ohio, and the familiar chaos of wrapping paper and excited voices echoed through the living room. But this Christmas would be different. This Christmas would finally show me exactly where I stood in my family's hierarchy, and the revelation would shatter everything I thought I knew about unconditional parental love. My parents. Linda and Robert Johnson had always been what most people would call good parents. Dad worked as an accountant for a local firm, and Mom taught high school English, provided for us, attended our school events, and never missed an opportunity to tell their friends about their children's accomplishments, but somewhere along the way, started noticing patterns that made my stomach twist with an uncomfortable truth I didn't want to acknowledge. The first major sign happened when I was 16 and Jessica was 13. I had been saving money from my part-time job at the local grocery store for months to buy a guitar. Music had become my passion, and I dreamed of joining the school band. I had exactly $347 saved up in a shoebox under my bed, every dollar. Earned through countless hours of stocking shelves and cleaning up spills. One Saturday morning, I went to count my money before finally making the purchase, only to find the box nearly empty. Only $23 remained. When I confronted my parents, Mom looked uncomfortable and Dad cleared his throat before explaining that Jessica had needed money for a school trip to Washington, D.C. They had borrowed my savings with the intention of paying me back, but somehow that payback never materialized. Instead, I watched Jessica post photos from her trip on social media while I continued working extra shifts, starting my savings all over again. When I finally bought that guitar 6 months later, Jessica had already moved on to wanting a laptop. For Christmas, which she received without question, the second major incident occurred during my senior year of high school. I had worked incredibly hard to maintain a 3.8 GPA. While balancing a job and volunteer work at the local animal shelter, my guidance counselor told me I had a real shot at getting into state university with a partial academic scholarship. The application fee was $75, and I had been planning to apply to 3 schools, so I needed $225 total. When I asked my parents for help with the application fees, Dad frowned and said they were a little tight that month and suggested I pick just one school to apply to. 2 weeks later, Jessica casually mentioned that she needed $300 for new cheerleading uniforms and equipment. Without hesitation, Mom took out her checkbook and wrote the check on the spot. When I pointed out the disparity, suggesting that my college applications were more important than cheerleading uniforms, Mom sighed and said, "Michael, you're so responsible. You'll figure it out. Jessica needs more support right now." That phrase, "you'll figure it out," became the soundtrack of my relationship with my parents. Need help with college expenses? You'll figure it out, Michael. Car breaks down and you need a ride to work? Can't you take the bus? You'll figure it out. Want to pursue your dreams of becoming a music teacher but need help with graduate school applications? You're so capable, honey. You'll figure it out. Meanwhile, Jessica's needs were always immediate emergencies requiring parental intervention. Failed a class and needed expensive tutoring? Mom and Dad hired the best tutor in town. Crashed her first car, which they had bought her for her 16th birthday because she was texting while driving. They bought her another one within a week, with only a gentle lecture about being more careful. Dropped out of college twice because she wasn't sure what she wanted to study. They welcomed her back home with open arms and continued paying all her expenses while she figured herself out. By the time I graduated from college with my teaching degree, I had accumulated $32,000 in student loans while working 2 part-time jobs throughout my 4 years. Jessica, who had finally settled on a communications major after changing her, mined 4 times, graduated with 0 debt because my parents had paid for everything, including her luxury apartment and her study abroad semester in Italy. I want to be clear about something. I love my sister. Jessica isn't a bad person, and she never explicitly asked for this preferential treatment. She's funny, creative, and can light up a room with her personality. But she had learned, perhaps unconsciously, that she could rely on our parents too. Solve her problems, while I had learned that I was expected to solve my own. This dynamic followed us into adulthood. When Jessica graduated college and couldn't find a job in her field, she moved back home and spent 8 months lounging around the house while our parents supported her completely. When I graduated and couldn't find a teaching position immediately, I moved in with 3 roommates, worked at a restaurant, and substitute taught until a full-time position opened up. The contrast was stark. But I told myself it was just temporary differences in our circumstances. 3 years ago, when I finally landed my dream job teaching 4th grade at Riverside Elementary, I was making $42,000 a year, not much, but enough, to rent a small apartment and start building some independence. I was proud of what I had accomplished, but my excitement was overshadowed when Jessica announced she was moving to California to pursue her passion for social media marketing. Our parents not only supported this decision, but also gave her $10,000 as a starting fund for her new adventure. When I mentioned that I could use some help with a security deposit for a better apartment closer to my school, Dad said they had. Jess spent a lot helping Jessica get established, and maybe I could look into it again in a few months. Those few months turned into a year, and that conversation never happened. Jessica's California dream lasted exactly 14 months. She returned home last November, claiming that the cost of living was too high and the job market was too competitive. Our parents welcomed her back without question, and she settled back into her old bedroom as if nothing had happened. She was now 25 years old, living rent-free, with no job and no apparent urgency to find one. Meanwhile, I had been driving the same Honda Civic I bought used when I was 22. The car had 180,000 miles on it, a passenger door that only opened from the outside, and a heating system that worked only when it felt like it. Every few months something else would break, and I'd spend money I didn't have on repairs just to keep it running. I had been saving every extra dollar for 2 years, hoping to accumulate enough for a down payment on a reliable used car. My girlfriend, Emma, who I'd been dating for 8 months, had witnessed several family dinners and had started to point out things I had become numb to noticing. "Did you see how your mom offered to do Jessica's laundry, but expected you to clear the table and load the dishwasher?" she asked after one particularly typical family Sunday dinner. "And when you mentioned needing new tires, your dad changed the subject. But when Jessica said she wanted to redecorate her room, your mom immediately started talking about shopping trips." Emma's observations made me uncomfortable because they forced me to acknowledge patterns I had spent years explaining away. I told myself that my parents treated me differently because I was more capable, more independent, more mature, but deep down, I was starting to realize that I had been overlooked and undervalued for so long that I had stopped expecting anything different. The final straw that led to this Christmas. Morning revelation had been building for months. In October, my car had finally given up completely. The transmission died, and the repair estimate was $3,200 more than the car was worth. I had exactly $2,800 saved up, which was supposed to be the beginning of my car fund, but instead, I had to use $800 of it for a temporary fix just to keep the car limping along. When I told my parents about my car troubles, Mom made sympathetic noises, and Dad suggested I look into certified pre-owned vehicles with good financing options. No offer of help, no suggestion that they might contribute to the solution, just more evidence that I was expected to figure it out on my own. But what happened next was what really opened my eyes. 3 weeks after my car crisis, Jessica mentioned during dinner that she was thinking about maybe looking for a job after the holidays. She casually added that it would be easier if she had reliable transportation since our town's public transit was limited. She wasn't even asking for anything specific, just thinking out loud about her theoretical future job search. Next morning, I overheard my parents having a quiet conversation in the kitchen. Mom was saying something about helping Jessica get back on her feet, and Dad was agreeing that a car would really help her become independent. When they noticed me listening, they quickly changed the subject. That conversation planted a seed of dread in my stomach that grew stronger as we approached Christmas. My parents had been acting strange for weeks, sharing secret smiles and having hushed phone conversations. Jessica seemed oblivious to their scheming, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something big was coming. Emma tried to reassure me that I was probably overthinking things. "Maybe they're planning something nice for you too," she suggested. "You've been such a good son. They have to see that." But even as she said it, I could see in her eyes that she didn't quite believe it herself. As Christmas Eve arrived, I found myself lying awake, staring at the ceiling of my childhood bedroom. Tomorrow would bring either a pleasant surprise that proved my fears wrong, or a confirmation of everything I had begun to suspect about my place in this family. I had no idea that it would be so much worse than I had even imagined. The week leading up to Christmas felt different this year, and not in a good way. There was an electric tension in the air every time I visited my parents' house, like everyone was walking around with a secret that I wasn't part of. Mom kept humming Christmas carols under her breath and had an almost manic cheerfulness that seemed forced. Dad was constantly checking his phone and making mysterious trips to the garage. Jessica, for her part, seemed completely oblivious to whatever was happening. She spent most of her time scrolling through social media, occasionally showing Mom videos of cats or complaining about how boring our hometown was. The irony wasn't lost on me that while she complained about being bored, she had made no effort to find a job or contribute to the household in any meaningful way. Emma had agreed to spend Christmas Eve with my family before going to her own family's celebration on Christmas Day. I was both grateful for her support and nervous about what she might witness. Our relationship was still relatively new, and I worried that seeing my family dynamics in full display might be too much too soon. "Are you sure you're okay?" Emma asked as we drove to my parents' house on Christmas Eve. "You've been quiet all day." I gripped the steering wheel of my dying Honda and forced a smile. "Just the usual holiday stress," I said, though we both knew it was more than that. The passenger side window had stopped rolling up completely last week, so we had to drive with the heat blasting to compensate for the cold air leaking in. The engine made a concerning rattling noise every time we stopped at a red light. "Hey, Michael," Emma said gently. "You know, you don't have to pretend with me, right? If something's bothering you, you can talk about it." That was one of the things I loved about Emma. She had this way of cutting through pretense and getting straight to the heart of things. We had met at a coffee shop near the school where I taught. She was a graphic designer working on her laptop, and I was grading papers. When my pen ran out of ink, and I sighed in frustration, she had wordlessly handed me one of hers. That small act of kindness led to a conversation, which led to a first date, which led to the best 8 months of my adult life. Emma had grown up in a family where problems were discussed openly and solutions were found together. Her parents had divorced when she was 12, but they had managed to co-parent effectively, and both had remained actively involved in her life. When she needed help with college expenses, both parents had contributed what they could. When her car was totaled in an accident last year, her dad had helped her research replacement vehicles, and her mom had co-signed a loan. They treated her like a capable adult while still offering support when needed. The contrast between her family's approach and mine was stark, and spending time with Emma's parents had shown me what healthy family dynamics could look like. They asked about my work, remembered details from previous conversations, and treated me as an equal rather than as someone who needed to prove his worth. "You're right," I said as we pulled into my parents' driveway. "I guess I'm just feeling anxious about ... everything. Money's tight, my car is falling apart, and I keep feeling like I'm disappointing everyone by not having my life completely together." Emma reached over and squeezed my hand. "You're 28 years old. You have a job you love. You're kind and responsible, and you're working hard to build something good. Anyone who can't see that is blind." Her words warmed me more than the car's broken heater ever could. Christmas Eve dinner was a traditional affair in the Johnson household. Mom had made her famous honey-glazed ham, garlic mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, and homemade dinner rolls. The table was set with the good china that only came out for holidays. And Dad had opened a bottle of wine that he'd been saving for a special occasion. "This looks amazing, Mom," I said as we all sat down. And it did. She had outdone herself this year. "Well, it's a special Christmas," Mom replied, sharing a meaningful look with Dad that made my stomach clench. We wanted everything to be perfect. Jessica was scrolling through her phone even at the dinner table, occasionally looking up to contribute to the conversation, but mostly absorbed in whatever was happening on her screen. This was typical behavior that our parents had long ago stopped trying to correct. "Jessica, honey, could you put your phone away while we're eating?" Emma asked politely. It was the first time she had directly addressed one of Jessica's ruder habits, and I held my breath, waiting for the response. Jessica looked up, seeming surprised that anyone had noticed.
"Ow."
"Sorry," she said, setting the phone aside. "I was just checking if any of my friends posted anything interesting today." "What kind of things do your friends post about?" Emma asked, making genuine conversation. "Oh, just life stuff. Sarah got engaged last month, and Rachel just started a new job in marketing. Everyone's doing such interesting things." Jessica's voice carried a wistful tone that suggested she felt left out of her friend's progress. "Have you thought more about what kind of work you'd like to do?" Emma continued. I could see she was trying to be encouraging rather than judgmental. Jessica shrugged. "There's not much available around here. I might need to look in Columbus or Cleveland, but then I'd need a car and an apartment and everything. It's complicated." "Most things worth doing are complicated at first," Emma said with a smile. "But you figure it out as you go." I nearly choked on my wine when I heard Emma use the phrase, "you figure it out," the same phrase my parents always used with me. But the way Emma said it was encouraging rather than dismissive, supportive rather than abandoning. "That's very true," Dad said, raising his glass. "Speaking of figuring things out, I think this Christmas is going to be about new beginnings for everyone." Mom giggled like a teenager with a secret. "Robert, you're being too obvious. What's going on?" Trying to keep my voice light. "You two are acting like you're planning something." "We are planning something," Mom said, her eyes sparkling. "But you'll have to wait until tomorrow morning to find out what it is." Jessica looked up from her temporarily abandoned phone. "Is it something for me?" "Something for everyone," Dad said carefully. "But especially for people who are ready to start the next chapter of their lives." The way he said it, looking directly at Jessica, made my chest tighten. I glanced at Emma, who was watching the exchange with raised eyebrows. "Well, now I'm curious too," Emma said diplomatically. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of forced cheerfulness and barely contained excitement from my parents. They kept sharing those secret looks, and Mom couldn't stop smiling. Jessica seemed to pick up on their energy and started speculating about what her surprise might be. "Maybe it's a trip somewhere," she mused, "or a new laptop. Mine is getting pretty old. We'll just have to wait and see," Mom said, practically bouncing in her chair. I tried to participate in the speculation, but a growing sense of dread was settling in my stomach. The more excited my parents became about Jessica's surprise, the more I realized that whatever they had planned probably didn't include me. After dinner, we moved to the living room to exchange our traditional Christmas Eve gifts, new pajamas. For everyone, a tradition Mom had maintained since we were children. This year, she had gotten me a set of dark blue flannel pajamas, Emma a matching set in burgundy, which surprised and touched me, and Jessica a silk set that probably cost 3 times what the others had. "These are beautiful, Mrs. Johnson," Emma said, holding up her pajamas. "Thank you for including me." "Of course," dear Mom replied. "You're part of the family now." The warmth in her voice when she said that to Emma was genuine. It made me realize that my parents' problem wasn't with my girlfriend, it was specifically with me. As the evening wound down, Dad disappeared into the garage for about 20 minutes. When he came back, he had a satisfied expression and slightly dirty hands, like he'd been working on something. "Just checking on things," he said, when Mom raised an eyebrow at his appearance. "Robert Johnson, you're being ridiculous," Mom laughed. "Tomorrow can't come soon enough." "What time should we come over tomorrow?" I asked, as Emma and I prepared to leave. "Early," Mom said immediately. "Say 8 o'clock. We want to start Christmas morning right away." 8 o'clock was unusually early for our family's Christmas celebration, which typically began around 10. But I didn't question it. As Emma and I drove back to my apartment, she was quiet for several minutes before finally speaking. Michael, I might be wrong, but I think your parents are planning to give Jessica a car for Christmas. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. What makes you say that? Your dad's mysterious garage trips, the timing of everything. The way they kept talking about new beginnings and next chapters while looking at her. Plus, Jessica mentioned needing transportation for job hunting, and your parents seemed to have a pattern of solving her problems immediately. I didn't want to believe it, but everything Emma said made perfect sense. The pieces were all there, forming a picture I didn't want to see. But what about my car situation? I asked, though I already knew the answer. They know I've been struggling with transportation for months. Emma reached over and put her hand on my leg. Honey, I think you already know the answer to that. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling of my bedroom, listening to the radiator clank and the neighbor's music through the thin apartment walls. Emma slept peacefully beside me, but my mind was racing with possibilities, each one worse than the last. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe their surprise was something that included both Jessica and me. Maybe there would be 2 gifts tomorrow morning, 2 new beginnings, 2 children being supported equally by their parents. But deep in my heart, I knew better. Tomorrow morning would bring the final confirmation of what I had suspected for years, that in the Johnson family hierarchy, I would always come second to Jessica, no matter what I accomplished or how much I needed help. I just had no idea how. Devastating that confirmation would be, Christmas morning dawned gray and cold. With the kind of bitter December wind that cuts right through your jacket, Emma and I arrived at my parents' house at exactly 8 o'clock to find Mom and Dad already dressed and waiting, their excitement practically vibrating in the air. "Good morning, sweethearts," Mom called out as we knocked on the door. "Come in. We've been waiting for you." Jessica was still in her pajamas, curled up on the couch with a cup of coffee and her usual bedhead. She looked half asleep but managed to smile when she saw us. "Merry Christmas, guys," she mumbled. "Mom's been up since 6. I think she's more excited about presents than we are." "It's going to be a very special Christmas," Dad announced, rubbing his hands together. "But first, coffee and cinnamon rolls. We need everyone fully awake for what's coming." The next hour felt like torture. We went through our usual Christmas morning routine: coffee, breakfast pastries, and small talk about the weather and our plans for the day. But underneath it all was this current of anticipation that made it impossible for me to relax. Kept glancing at me with concern, probably noticing how tense I was becoming. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Dad clapped his hands together. "All right, everyone, I think it's time for the main event. Finally," Jessica said, perking up considerably. "Been dying to know what you guys have been planning." Mom and Dad exchanged one more of their secret looks before Dad headed toward the front door. "Jessica, honey, could you come with me for a minute? There's something outside we want to show you." My heart started pounding. This was it. This was the moment I had been dreading. "Should we all come?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Everyone should see this," Mom said. But her eyes were focused entirely on Jessica. We all bundled up in our coats and followed Dad outside. The morning air was sharp and cold, and our breath created little clouds as we walked. Dad led us down the driveway toward the street, where I noticed a red sedan parked at the curb that hadn't been there yesterday. It was a Honda Accord. It's maybe 3 or 4 years old, in pristine condition. It looked like it had just been driven. Off a dealer's lot, Jessica stopped walking. "Mom, Dad, what's going on?" Dad reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of keys. They caught the weak morning sunlight and seemed to sparkle as he held them up. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We bought her for you." The world seemed to stop spinning. Jessica's hands flew to her mouth, and she started crying immediately. "Are you serious? Are you actually serious?" "Right now." "Dead serious," Mom said, tears streaming down her own face. "You need a car to start your job search, and we want to help you get back on your feet. Consider it an investment in your future." Jessica threw her arms around both our parents, sobbing with joy. "I can't believe this. I can't believe you did this for me. This is the most amazing gift I've ever received." I stood there in the cold, watching my sister embrace our parents while they all cried tears of happiness, and I felt something break. Inside my chest, it was like watching my worst nightmare play out in slow motion. The car was beautiful. It probably cost $15,000, maybe more. It had heated seats, Bluetooth connectivity, and all the safety features you could want. It was exactly the kind of reliable, practical vehicle I had been dreaming of buying for myself. "Michael," Mom said, suddenly remembering I was there. "This wonderful? Jessica can really start moving forward with her life?" I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. Emma stepped closer to me and slipped her hand into mine. I could feel her squeezing my fingers, trying to ground me. "It's a beautiful car," I managed to say. My voice sounded strange and distant, like it was coming from someone else. Jessica was already in the driver's seat, adjusting the mirrors and exploring all the controls. "Oh my God, it even has a backup camera. And look at this touchscreen." Dad was beaming with pride. "We wanted to make sure you had something safe and reliable. The dealer said this model has excellent ratings for dependability. Safe and reliable. It's the exact words I had used when describing what I needed in a vehicle." How much did this cost?" I asked quietly. Dad waved his hand dismissively. "Don't worry about that. It's an investment in Jessica's future. She needs to be able to get around if she's going to find a good job." "But Michael needs a car too," Emma said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her, and I saw her face flush slightly, but she continued. "His car barely runs. He's been saving up to replace it for years." There was an uncomfortable silence. Mom and Dad exchanged a look that I knew all too well. The look that said they were about to explain why my problems were different, why my needs were less important. "Michael's car still runs," Mom said carefully. "And he's always been so good at making things work. He'll figure something out." There it was. The phrase that had defined my entire relationship with my parents. "He'll figure it out," I repeated slowly. "Right. Of course." "Michael," Dad said, and I could hear the warning tone in his voice. "This is Jessica's moment. Let her enjoy it." But something inside me snapped. All the years of being overlooked, all the times I had been told to figure it out while Jessica was handed solutions on a silver platter, all the quiet resentment I had swallowed down came rushing to the surface. "You know what, Dad? You're absolutely right. This is Jessica's moment. It's just like every other moment for the past 28 years has been Jessica's moment." "Michael," Mom said sharply. "That's enough." "No, Mom, it's not enough. It's not nearly enough." I could hear my voice getting louder, but I couldn't stop myself. "Do you have any idea what this feels like? Do you have any idea what it's like? To watch your parents buy your sister a $15,000 car while you've been driving a piece of junk for 6 years?" Jessica had gotten out of the car and was staring at me with wide eyes. "Michael, I didn't ask for this. I know you didn't ask for it." I turned to face her. "You never have to ask for anything, Jessica. It just appears. Money for college. Money for trips. Money for failed adventures in California. And now, a brand new car. You don't have to ask because Mom and Dad anticipate your every need." "That's not fair," Jessica said, her voice small. "You're right. It's not fair. It's not fair that I've worked 2 jobs since I was 16 while you've never had to work at all. It's not fair that I paid for my own college while they paid for yours. It's not fair that when I needed help with application fees, they told me to pick one school, but when you needed cheerleading uniforms, they wrote a check without blinking." "Michael, stop it," Dad said firmly. "You're being unreasonable? Unreasonable?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. I've been nothing but reasonable for my entire life. I've been understanding and accommodating and grateful for scraps while watching you shower Jessica with everything she could possibly want. Mom stepped forward, her face flushed with anger. That is not true, and you know it. We love both our children equally. Do you? I asked. Yes. Your actions say otherwise. When was the last time you bought me something that cost more than $50? When was the last time you offered to help me with anything without me having to beg for it first? The silence stretched out between us, broken only by the sound of wind rustling through the bare trees. Your situations are different, Mom said finally. You've always been more independent, more capable. Jessica needs more support. Jessica is 25 years old. Mom, 25. She's 3 years out of college and has never held a steady job. At what point does support become enabling? How dare you, Jessica said, her voice shaking. How dare you try to ruin this? For me, I didn't choose to be born different from you. I didn't choose to struggle more than you do. Struggle with what exactly? I shot back. Struggle with having every problem solved for you before you even have to face it. Struggle with never having to take responsibility for your own life? That's enough. Dad's voice boomed across the driveway. Michael, you're being cruel and selfish. Today is about celebrating your sister's new beginning, and you're ruining it with your jealousy. Jealousy. That's what they thought this was. Not a legitimate grievance about years of unequal treatment, but simple jealousy. Emma stepped forward and put her hand on my arm. Maybe we should go, she said quietly. Yeah, I said, looking at my family, my parents standing protectively near Jessica, all of them staring at me like I was the villain in this story. Maybe we should. Michael, wait. Mom called as Emma and I started walking toward my car. Being dramatic. Come back inside and we'll talk about this. I stopped and turned around one more time. You want to know what's dramatic, Mom? What's dramatic is buying your 25-year-old daughter a car while your 28-year-old son's car is literally falling apart. What's dramatic is expecting me to be happy about it. I didn't know your car situation was that serious, Dad said. I told you about it 3 months ago.
Told you.
The transmission was dying. I told you I was looking for a replacement but couldn't afford anything decent. But you weren't listening because you never listen when it comes to my problems. I got into my rattling Honda and started the engine, which protested with its usual symphony of concerning noises. Through the windshield, I could see my family standing in a cluster near Jessica's shiny new car, watching me drive away as we pulled. Out of the subdivision, Emma was quiet for several minutes. I'm proud of you, she said finally. For what? For ruining Christmas and probably destroying my relationship with my family? For finally standing up for yourself? For saying what needed to be said? I felt tears threatening and blinked them. Back hard. I can't believe I did that. Can't believe I actually said all those things. It's Michael, everything you said was true. I've been watching your family dynamics for months, and what happened today was inexcusable. They bought your sister a car worth more than most people make in 6 months, while completely ignoring your needs. And then they acted like you were being unreasonable for being upset about it. But she's my sister. I love her. I didn't want to hurt her. You didn't hurt her by telling the truth. Your parents hurt both of you by creating this dynamic where one child gets everything and the other child gets nothing. We drove in silence for a while, my car making increasingly worrying noises as we went. By the time we reached my apartment, I was emotionally exhausted. What happens now? I asked, as we sat in the parking lot. Now you decide what kind of relationship you want with your family going forward, Emma said. It's because after today, things are going to have to change one way or another. She was right. There was no going back from what had happened this morning. The facade of family harmony had been shattered, and all the resentment I had buried for years was now out in the open. My phone had been buzzing with texts from my parents and Jessica, but I wasn't ready to read them yet. I needed time to process what had happened and figure out what came next. One thing was certain. I was done being the accommodating son who accepted whatever scraps of attention and support my parents threw my way. I was done pretending that their treatment of Jessica and me was equal. It was time to start figuring it out, in a way my parents had never intended. The first text came from Jessica. 20 minutes after we got back to my apartment, Michael. I'm so sorry. I didn't know you felt this way. Can we please talk? Then Mom, you embarrassed this entire family today. Your behavior was completely unacceptable. God, call me when you're ready to apologize. Finally, Dad, son, I think you need some time to cool down and think about what you said today. We love you, but your outburst was way out of line. It's asterisk. I set my phone aside without responding to any of them. Emma made us coffee while I sat on my couch, staring out the window at the gray December sky. Everything felt surreal, like the morning had happened to someone else. Do you want to talk about it? Emma asked, settling beside me with 2 steaming mugs. I keep replaying it in my head, I said. The look on their faces when I started talking back, they were so shocked. Like they couldn't believe I had opinions about how they've treated me all these years. What shocked them was that you finally called them out on it. They've gotten comfortable with the dynamic where you just accept whatever they decide is fair. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Jessica calling. I let it go to voicemail. She's called 3 times, I told Emma. I don't know what to say to her. You don't have to say anything right now. I just had a major confrontation with your ex-family. It's okay to take some time to process it. But even as Emma said that, I felt guilty for not answering Jessica's calls. Despite everything, despite the years of watching her receive preferential treatment, I still felt protective of her. She was my little sister, and the hurt in her voice when I said those things about her kept echoing in my mind. I was too harsh. With her, I said, none of this is really her fault. Michael, you told the truth about an unfair situation. Jessica is 25 years old. She's old enough to understand that actions have consequences, even if those consequences aren't her fault. Around noon, my phone rang again. This time it was my mom, and something made me answer it. Hello, Mom? Michael. Her voice was cold and formal. I think you owe your sister an apology, do I? Yes, you do. She's been crying all morning. You completely ruined what should have been one of the happiest days of her life. I felt that familiar guilt starting to creep in, the automatic response, to put everyone else's feelings before my own. But then I thought about Emma's words and forced myself to stay strong. Mom, Jessica got a $15,000 car for Christmas. I think she'll recover from having her feelings hurt. That is not the point, Michael. The point is that you behaved like a spoiled child because you didn't get what you wanted. What I wanted? I could feel my anger rising again. I didn't want anything specific. I just wanted to be treated like I matter as much as Jessica does. Of course you matter. You're our son. But that doesn't mean we can buy cars for everyone. Could have bought a car for the child whose car is actually broken, instead of the child who just wanted one for convenience. There was a long pause. On the other end of the line, Cal, we've always taught you to be self-reliant. It's made you into a strong, capable person. Jessica needs more help because she's different. Exactly. Another pause. She's more sensitive. She needs more support to navigate life. You've always been able to handle things on your own. It's because I've been forced to handle things on my own my entire life. I should never receive help because I've learned to be self-reliant out of necessity. I should never be given the support that might have made my life easier. That's not what I'm saying. That's exactly what you're saying. Mom, you're saying that Jessica deserves help because she's never learned to help herself, and I don't deserve help because I've had to learn to help myself. You're twisting my words. I'm repeating them back to you. The conversation went in circles for another 10 minutes before Mom finally hung up in frustration. I felt drained and somehow both vindicated and terrible at the same time. Emma had been listening to my side of the conversation, and when I set the phone down, she moved closer to me on the couch. How are you feeling? She asked. Like I just kicked a puppy, I admitted. But also like I finally said things that needed to be said. That's normal. You've been trained your whole life to prioritize everyone else's comfort over your own legitimate needs. It's going to feel wrong at first when you stop doing that. Around 2 o'clock, there was a knock at my apartment door. Through the peephole, I could see Jessica standing in the hallway, looking small and sad. She was wearing the coat she'd had on that morning. Her eyes were red from crying. I opened the door, but didn't invite her in immediately. Hi, she said quietly. Hi, can we talk, please? I looked back at Emma, who nodded encouragingly then stepped aside to let Jessica into the apartment. She sat on the edge of my armchair like she was ready to flee at any moment. Michael, I need you to know that I never meant for things to be unfair. I never asked Mom and Dad to treat us differently. I know you didn't ask for it, I said carefully. But you did accept it. You've been accepting it your whole life without questioning whether it was fair to me. I guess I just thought that's how families worked. That parents help where help is needed most. And you thought you needed help more than I did. Jessica was quiet for a long moment. I thought you didn't need help. You've always seemed so together, so capable of handling everything. Mom and Dad always talked about how responsible and independent you were. I assumed that meant you didn't want their help. Jessica, I've been working since I was 16. I paid for my own college, my own car, my own everything. Did you really think I was doing that because I preferred it that way? I never really thought about it. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I was just focused on my own problems. That was probably the most honest thing she'd ever said to me about this situation. The thing is, I continued, even if you never asked for the preferential treatment, you also never spoke up when you saw it happening. When you saw me struggling with something and Mom and Dad ignored it, you never said, hey, maybe we should help Michael too. Would that have made a difference? It would have meant that someone in this family was paying attention to what I was going through. Jessica started crying again, quietly this time. I'm sorry, Michael. I'm really sorry. I never realized how much I was hurting you just by ... existing. You weren't hurting me by existing. You were hurting me by being oblivious to the inequality while benefiting from it. She nodded, wiping her face. What can I do to fix this? It was a good question, and I wasn't sure I had an answer. I don't know if you can fix it, Jessica. This isn't really about the car. The car is just the latest example of a pattern that's been going on our entire lives. You're my brother, and I love you, and I don't want this to destroy our relationship. I looked at Emma, who had been quietly observing this conversation. She gave me a small nod of encouragement. If you really want to fix this, I said slowly, you need to start by acknowledging to Mom and Dad that the way they've treated us has been unfair. You need to stop accepting their help without question and start taking responsibility for your own life. What do you mean? I mean, get a job, Jessica. Start paying for your own expenses. Move out of their house. Show them that you're capable of being independent instead of reinforcing their belief that you need constant support. Jessica looked terrified at the suggestion. But what if I can't? What if I try to be independent and I fail? Then you'll figure it out, I said, using the phrase that had defined my entire life, just like I've had to figure everything out. She was quiet for a long time, processing what I'd said. The car, she said finally. Should I give it back? I considered this. Part of me wanted her to give it back, to make some grand gesture that showed she understood how wrong this whole situation was. But I also knew that returning the car wouldn't really solve anything. The damage was already done, and the car was just a symbol of a much deeper problem. Keep the car, I said, but use it to get a job. Use it to start building your own life instead of relying on Mom and Dad to build one for you. Okay, she said. I can do that. And Jessica? The next time Mom and Dad criticize me for being upset about this, I need you to speak up. I need you to tell them that you understand why I'm hurt and that their treatment of us has been unequal, even if it makes them angry at me, especially if it makes them angry at you. Because until now, you've never had to deal with their disapproval. You've never had to be the child who disappoints them. Maybe it's time you understood what that feels like. Jessica left about an hour later, after promising to think seriously about everything we discussed. I wasn't entirely convinced she would follow through. But for the first time in our relationship, she seemed to actually understand my perspective. That evening, Emma and I ordered Chinese takeout and watched old movies, trying to create some normalcy after the chaos of the day. But my phone kept buzzing with messages from my parents, each one more demanding than the last. Asterisk, Michael, this silent treatment is childish. Call us back, asterisk. Asterisk, your mother is very upset. You need to fix this. Asterisk, asterisk, we raised you better than this. Stop being selfish and think about your family. Asterisk, they're really ramping up the guilt, I observed, showing Emma the latest round of messages. Classic manipulation tactics, she said. They're trying to make you feel like you're the problem for disrupting their comfortable dynamic. They're right? What if I am being selfish? Emma paused the movie and turned to face me fully. Michael, let me ask you something. If your friend came to you and told you that his parents had bought his sister a $15,000 car while ignoring his transportation problems, what would you tell him? I'd tell him that his parents were being unfair. And if he told you that this was just the latest example in a lifetime pattern of his sister receiving preferential treatment, I'd tell him he had every right to be upset. And if he told you that when he finally spoke up about it, his family accused him of being selfish and jealous, I'd tell him that they were trying to manipulate him into accepting unfair treatment. Emma smiled. Then trust your own judgment. You would never advise a friend to accept what you've been accepting from your family. She was right, of course. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally were two different things. I had been conditioned my entire life to prioritize my family's comfort over my own needs, and it was going to take time to unlearn that response. As we got ready for bed that night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to respond to my parents' messages tonight. I wasn't going to call them back and apologize for telling the truth. I wasn't going to smooth things over and pretend that everything was fine. For the first time in my life, I was going to let them sit with the discomfort of their actions, without rushing to make them feel better about it. It was terrifying and liberating at the same time. 2 days passed without any contact between my parents and me. The silence felt both heavy and peaceful heavy, because I'd never gone this long without talking to them. Peaceful because I wasn't constantly bracing myself for the next disappointment or dismissal. On December 27th, Emma went to visit her own family for a belated Christmas celebration. I spent the day grading papers and trying to prepare mentally for returning to school after winter break. Being alone gave me time to think about everything that had happened and what I wanted to say when my parents inevitably demanded a conversation. That conversation came sooner than expected. At 6 o'clock that evening, there was a firm knock at my apartment door. I knew without looking that it would be my parents. Jessica wasn't the type to make unannounced visits, and Emma had texted me that she was still with her family. I opened the door to find both Mom and Dad standing in the hallway, their faces set in matching expressions of stern determination. They were dressed like they were headed to a business meeting rather than visiting their son. "We need to talk," Dad said without preamble. "Hello to you too," I replied, stepping aside to let them in. They entered my small apartment and looked around with the same expression they might wear when inspecting a crime scene. Mom wrinkled her nose slightly at the stack of unfolded laundry on my kitchen table, and Dad frowned at the pile of student papers spread across my coffee table. "Sit down, Michael," Mom said, settling herself on my couch like she owned the place. "We're going to settle this once and for all." I remained standing. Something about their tone and demeanor put me on the defensive immediately. "Settle what, exactly?" "This tantrum you've been throwing," Dad said bluntly. "This jealousy and resentment you've been harboring toward your sister." I felt my jaw clench. "Is that what you think this is? A tantrum?" "What else would you call it?" Mom asked. "You completely humiliated Jessica on Christmas morning because you were upset that she received a gift. That's textbook jealous behavior. Mom, the gift was a $15,000 car. And it wasn't just that she received IT, it was that I've been struggling with transportation issues for months, and you've ignored it completely." "We didn't ignore it," Dad said. "We told you to look into financing options. We gave you practical advice about how to handle your situation. You gave me the same advice you'd give to a stranger. You didn't offer to help me the way you immediately helped Jessica, because you don't need that kind of help," Mom said, exasperation creeping into her voice. "Michael, you're 28 years old. You have a steady job, you're responsible with money, and you've always been independent. Jessica is different. She needs more support to get her life on track." "Different? How?" I asked the same question I'd asked during our phone conversation. What exactly makes Jessica incapable of solving her own problems? My parents exchanged one of their meaningful looks, the kind that had excluded me from family decisions my entire life. "Jessica has always been more sensitive," Mom said carefully. "She doesn't handle stress and challenges the way you do. She needs a gentler approach to life. She's had a gentler approach to life. She's had the gentlest possible approach to life." And what has it gotten her? She's 25 years old, with no job, no independence, and no ability to handle basic adult responsibilities. That's not fair, Dad said sharply. Jessica is trying to find her place in the world. Not everyone follows the same timeline. Dad, it's been 3 years since she graduated college. How much more time does she need to find her place? As much time as she needs, Mom said firmly. And it's not your place to judge her journey. You're right, it's not my place to judge her journey. But it is my place to judge how my parents treat their children. And your treatment of Jessica versus your treatment of me has been completely unfair my entire life. Dad stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger. That is enough, Michael. Your mother and I have done our best to raise both of you according to your individual needs. If you can't see that, if you can't appreciate the values we've tried to instill in you, then maybe the problem isn't with us. What values exactly? The value that says one child deserves unconditional support while the other child deserves conditional indifference? We have never been indifferent to you, Mom said, her voice rising. We've been proud of your independence and your strength. We've bragged about you to our friends, talked about how responsible and capable you are. But you've never helped me. You've never offered to make my life easier the way you constantly make Jessica's life easier. Because you don't need that kind of help. Everyone needs help sometimes, Mom. Everyone deserves to feel like their family has their back when things get difficult. But I've never felt that way. I've felt like I'm on my own, and if I succeed, it's because I worked hard enough. If I fail, it's because I didn't work hard enough. There was a moment of silence during which my parents stared at me like I had just spoken in a foreign language. Michael, Dad said slowly, we have always supported you. How? Give me one specific example of how you've supported me in the last 5 years. We encouraged you when you got your teaching job. Encouragement isn't support. Support would have been helping me with the expenses of moving closer to the school. Support would have been offering to help with my car when it started breaking down. Support would have been treating my problems like they mattered as much as Jessica's problems. Your problems are different from Jessica's problems, Mom insisted, because you've made them different. You've trained Jessica to believe that every problem can be solved by asking Mom and Dad for help. And you've trained me to believe that asking for help is a sign of weakness or failure. We trained you to be self-reliant, Dad said. It's a valuable life skill. Self-reliance is a valuable life skill when it's chosen, Dad. When it's forced on you because your parents won't help you, it's just neglect disguised as character building. The word neglect hung in the air between us like a bomb that had just exploded. I could see the shock and anger on both their faces. How dare you, Mom whispered. How dare you accuse us of neglecting you? We have given you everything you needed. You've given me everything you thought I could handle on my own. There's a difference. Michael, this conversation is over, Dad said, moving toward the door. When you're ready to apologize for your behavior and your accusations, you can call us. Until then, I think it's best if we don't talk. I'm not going to apologize for telling the truth. Then I guess we have nothing more to say to each other. Mom stood up and followed Dad toward the door. At the threshold, she turned back to me. I hope you're happy, she said. I hope this anger and resentment you're choosing to hold on to makes you feel better about your life. It's not anger and resentment, Mom, it's disappointment. I'm disappointed that my parents don't love me enough to treat me as well as they treat my sister. We do love you, she said, tears forming in her eyes. We love you just as much as we love Jessica. Then show me. Start treating me like you love me as much as you love her. We shouldn't have to prove our love to you, Michael. You should just know it. I should know it because you show it, not because you say it. After they left, I sat in my apartment feeling emotionally exhausted, but also strangely clear-headed. The conversation had gone exactly as I'd expected it to go. They had dismissed my concerns, defended their favoritism, and made me out to be the unreasonable one for wanting equal treatment. But something had shifted inside me during that conversation. For the first time in my life, I had looked my parents in the eye and told them exactly how their behavior had affected me, without softening the message or cushioning the blow. I had refused to accept their explanations or make excuses for their choices. It felt terrifying and empowering at the same time. When Emma returned later that evening, she found me sitting on my couch with a cup of tea, staring out the window. "Was your day?" she asked, settling beside me. My parents came by. We had the conversation I've been avoiding my entire life. "How did it go?" "About as well as you'd expect. I think I'm being unreasonable and ungrateful. I think Jessica deserves special treatment because she's more sensitive than I am. They think I should just accept that this is how things are." Emma was quiet for a moment, processing what I'd told her. "How do you feel about it?" "Sad," I said, honestly. "Really sad. But also relieved. Like I finally stopped pretending that everything was okay when it wasn't." "That's huge, Michael. That's really huge." I told them I wouldn't apologize for telling the truth. And I meant it. Emma smiled and leaned against my shoulder. "I'm proud of you. Even if it means my relationship with my family might never be the same. Especially because of that. You can't have a real relationship with people who refuse to. Acknowledge how they've hurt you. If your parents aren't willing to examine their behavior and make changes, then the relationship you had with them was based on you accepting unfair treatment." She was right, but it didn't make the situation any less painful. These were my parents, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally and want the best for me. The fact that they couldn't see how their favoritism had affected me, or didn't care enough to change it, was devastating. But I was done being devastated quietly. I was done accepting crumbs and calling them love. I was done putting everyone else's comfort before my own dignity. If my family wanted a relationship with me going forward, it would have to be on terms that included basic respect and fairness. If they weren't willing to offer that, then maybe. We didn't have as much to lose as I'd thought. The next few weeks passed in a strange state of suspension. Emma had returned to work after the holiday break, and I was back in my classroom with my fourth graders. I was trying to focus on lesson plans and multiplication tables while processing the earthquake that had just shaken my family relationships. My students, bless them, provided a welcome distraction. 9-year-olds have a wonderful way of keeping you grounded in the present moment. When Tommy raises his hand to tell you that his hamster learned to do backflips, or when Sarah proudly shows you the story she wrote about a dragon who only eats vegetables, it's impossible to stay stuck in family drama. But the silence from my parents was deafening. No phone calls, no text messages, not even the usual forwarded chain emails that Mom usually sent. It was as if I had been erased from their lives completely. Jessica, however, had been texting me regularly. Small messages, nothing dramatic. * hope. You're having a good week. * saw a funny meme that reminded me of you. * started looking at job listings today. * that last message surprised me. I called her that evening. "Hey," she answered on the second ring. "I wasn't sure if you'd call back." "You said you were looking at job listings. Are you serious about that?" "Yeah, I am. I've been thinking about what you said about taking responsibility for my own life, and you're right. I can't keep living with Mom and Dad forever." "Or they handling that?" Jessica was quiet for a moment. "Not well. When I told them I was job hunting, Dad said there was no rush, that I should take my time and find something I'm really passionate about. And when I mentioned maybe looking for my own apartment, Mom started crying. Of course she did." "Michael, can I ask you something? You moved out? How did you know you were ready?" I thought about that question. I don't think I ever felt ready. I just knew I had to do it. Living at home was making me feel like a child, and I wanted to feel like an adult. "Were you scared? Terrified?" But it was the good kind of scared, you know? Like when you're about to do something challenging that you know will be good for you. I'm scared too. But it's not the good kind. It's the kind where I worry I'll fail and have to come crawling back. "Jessica, can I tell you something? The difference between us isn't that I'm naturally more capable than you are. The difference is that I've been forced to develop those capabilities while you've been protected from having to develop them. You think I'm spoiled? I think you're untested. There's a difference." Jessica was quiet for a long moment. "An interview next week at a marketing company downtown. It's just an entry-level position, but it's a start." "That's great, Jess. Really great. Will you help me prepare for it? I don't really know what I'm doing." It was the first time in our adult lives that Jessica had asked me for help instead of going to our parents. Something about that felt significant. Of course I'll help you. We spent an hour on the phone that night going over potential interview questions and talking about what she should wear and how to research the company. It reminded me of the relationship I'd always wanted to have with my sister one, where we supported each other instead of competing for parental attention. The next week, Jessica called me with good news. She'd gotten the job. It was a basic, administrative position with a small marketing firm, but it was full-time with benefits and room for growth. "I start on Monday," she said, and I could hear both excitement and nervousness in her voice. How did Mom and Dad react? Dad said, "Congratulations," but then immediately started asking if I was sure about the hours and whether the commute would be too stressful. Mom wanted to know if I'd looked into the company's reputation and whether I felt safe working downtown. "Classic," I said. "They can't just be happy for your success. They have to find reasons for you to doubt yourself." Is that what they were doing? "Jessica, when I got my teaching job, do you remember how they reacted? They said, 'Congratulations.'" Said congratulations, and then immediately moved on to other topics. They didn't ask follow-up questions or express concerns about my well-being. They just acknowledged the achievement and moved on. I never noticed that difference. That's because you've never been on the receiving end of the minimal response. 3 weeks into Jessica's new job, she called me with another update. "I'm looking at apartments," she said. "There's a really cute one-bedroom about 15 minutes from work. It's small, but it has good light, and it's in my budget." "That's exciting. When do you want to look at it?" "Actually, I was wondering if you and Emma might come with me." "Could use a second opinion, and I trust your judgment." Again, this was new territory for us.
Hey, Jessica.
Asking for my advice, treating me like someone whose opinion mattered. The apartment was small, but charming, with hardwood floors and large windows. It was also exactly the kind of place I would have loved to afford when I was starting out. It couldn't because I didn't have parents willing to help with deposits and moving expenses. "What do you think?" Jessica asked as we walked through the tiny kitchen. "I think it's perfect for a first apartment," I said honestly. "It's clean, it's safe, and it's close to your work. Mom thinks it's too small. She keeps sending me listings for bigger places that cost twice as much." "Jessica, this apartment is bigger than what most people our age can afford in their first place. And more importantly, it's what you can afford with your own income. You really think I should take it? I think you should take it if you love it. Don't let anyone talk you out of something that feels right just because they think you deserve better." Jessica signed the lease that afternoon. When she called her parents to tell them, I could hear Mom's voice through the phone expressing concern about the neighborhood, the size, and whether Jessica was rushing into independence. "You know what Mom said after I hung up?" Jessica told me later. She said maybe I should wait a few more months to make sure the job works out before committing to a lease.
What did you tell her? I told her that I'm 25 years old and
I'm ready to start living my own life. And then she started crying again. How did that make you feel? Guilty, but also proud, like I was finally doing something that was mine, you know? I knew exactly what she meant. As Jessica started preparing for her move, something interesting happened. Our parents began reaching out to me again, but not directly. Instead, they started asking Jessica to pass along messages. "Mom wants to know if you're planning to come to Sunday dinner this week," Jessica told me during one of our regular check-ins. "What did you tell her?" "I told her to call you herself if she wants to know what your plans are." "Good answer." Dad asked if you might be willing to help me move some furniture this weekend. But then he said he could ask one of his coworkers instead, if you're still being difficult. The phrase "still being difficult" rankled me, as if standing up for myself was a temporary phase I was going through rather than a permanent change in how I was willing to be treated. "I'll help you move," I told Jessica, but not because Dad asked. "Because you're my sister, and I want to support you. Thank you, and Michael." I told Dad that you're not being difficult. I told him you're being honest about how you've been treated, and that maybe it's time the rest of us started being honest too. How did he react to that? He got quiet and changed the subject. The day of Jessica's move was surprisingly emotional. As we loaded her belongings into a rented truck, I realized I was watching my sister take her first real steps toward independence. It was something I'd been hoping for years. Seeing it happen felt like a victory for both of us. Our parents came to help, of course. They couldn't resist the opportunity to hover and worry and offer unsolicited advice about everything from the proper way to pack dishes to whether Jessica should have rented a storage unit for items she wasn't taking with her. They were polite to me, but distant, maintaining the same energy you might have with a coworker you don't particularly like, but have to collaborate with professionally. When we finished loading the truck, Dad approached me as I was closing the tailgate. "Thank you for helping today," he said formally. "Jessica is my sister, of course I helped. Michael, about what happened at Christmas. ... What about it? Maybe we could all sit down and talk things through, clear the air." I looked at him carefully. "Are you ready to acknowledge that your treatment of Jessica and me has been unfair?" Dad's jaw tightened. "I'm ready to discuss our family dynamics like adults." "That's not the same thing, Dad. What do you want from us, Michael? What would it take for you to move past this? I want you to admit that you've shown favoritism toward Jessica our entire lives. I want you to acknowledge that this favoritism has hurt me and that it's been unfair. And I want you to commit to treating us equally going forward. And if we can't do that, I guess we don't have much to discuss." Dad stared at me for a long moment, then walked away without another word. As we drove Jessica's belongings to her new apartment, she was quiet in the passenger seat of my rattling Honda. "You okay?" I asked. "I think I'm starting to understand what you've been dealing with all these years," she said quietly. "What do you mean? It's the way they've been acting about me moving out? All the worry and the suggestions and the offers to help with rent if the job doesn't work out. They're treating me like I'm incapable of handling adult life, and I realized that if this is how they treat the child they think needs help, I can't imagine how lonely it must have been to be the child they thought didn't need help." It was the most insightful thing Jessica had ever said about our family dynamics. "It was lonely," I admitted. "Really lonely. I'm sorry, Michael. I'm sorry I never noticed. I'm sorry I never spoke up. And I'm sorry it took me 25 years to start taking responsibility for my own life. You're doing it now. That's what matters." Yeah. As we unloaded boxes in Jessica's new apartment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Optimism about my relationship with my sister. For the first time, we were building something together based on mutual respect rather than competition for parental approval. It was a start. 6 months later, my life looked completely different than it had on Christmas morning. The most obvious change was sitting in my driveway, a reliable, 6-year-old Toyota Camry that I had purchased with a combination of my savings and a reasonable loan from my credit union. It wasn't flashy, but it was dependable, safe, and mine. Every morning when I started the engine and it purred to life without complaint, I felt a small surge of pride. I had bought the car entirely on my own without asking my parents for help, or even telling them I was shopping for one. When Mom saw it parked in front of their house during one of my rare visits, she asked where it had come from with the kind of surprise that suggested she'd never really believed I could solve my transportation problems without their intervention. "I figured it out," I told her, and left it at that. But the real changes went much deeper than my improved transportation situation. Jessica had been thriving in her new job in an apartment, the girl who 6 months ago had seemed incapable of handling basic adult responsibilities was now managing her own budget, cooking her own meals, and even starting to date someone she'd met at work. She called me regularly to share updates about her life, ask for advice, and just catch up. Our relationship had evolved into something I'd never experienced before, genuine friendship between siblings. "I got a promotion," she told me during one of our weekly phone calls. "It's not a huge jump, but it comes with a raise and more responsibility." "That's amazing, Jess. How do you feel about it?" "Scared but excited. Like I might actually be good at this whole adult thing." "You're good at it? You just needed the chance to prove it to yourself." "Mom and Dad still ask if I need money every time they see me. Last week, Dad suggested I might want to move back home to save money for a house down payment." "What did you tell him?" "I told him I'm happy where I am, and I'm learning to manage my own finances." He looked at me like I'd grown a second head. Jessica's increasing independence had created an interesting dynamic with our parents. They seemed genuinely confused by her desire for autonomy, as if they couldn't understand why anyone would choose to struggle with challenges when accepting help was an option. but they were also starting to express a grudging pride in her accomplishments. My relationship with my parents, however, remained complicated. We had settled into a pattern of cordial but distant interaction. I attended family gatherings when I chose to, usually holidays or special occasions. But I no longer felt obligated to maintain the facade of closeness when genuine closeness wasn't possible. The turning point had come in March, during Jessica's birthday dinner. As usual, Mom and Dad had gone overboard with gifts and celebration. While I had given Jessica a thoughtful but modest presenter, nice planner to help her organize her new responsibilities at work, during dinner, Dad made a comment about how proud they were of both their children and how they'd always tried to support each of us according to our individual needs. For once, Jessica spoke up. "Dad, can I say something?" She set down her fork and looked directly at our father. "I love you and Mom, and I'm grateful for all the help you've given me over the years. But I need you to know that your treatment of Michael and me hasn't been equal, and it hasn't been fair." The silence that followed was deafening. "Jessica," Mom said carefully, "we've always loved you both equally." "Love and treatment are two different things," Jessica replied. "You've solved my problems while expecting Michael to solve his own. You've supported my dreams while taking his strength for granted. And when he finally told you how that felt, you made him out to be the bad guy for having feelings about it." Dad's face was flushed. "We did what we thought was best for both of you. I know you did. But impact matters more than intention. And the impact of your choices was that one of your children felt loved and supported, while the other felt overlooked and undervalued." I sat there in stunned silence, watching my little sister, the same person who 6 months ago couldn't handle job interviews without help, advocate for me, with more clarity and conviction than I'd ever managed myself. "Michael has been an amazing brother to me," Jessica continued. "He's been patient with my mistakes, supportive of my growth, and generous with his help, even when he had every reason to resent me. He deserves better from his family." The conversation that followed wasn't magical or healing in the way that movie conversations are. My parents didn't suddenly see the error of their ways and apologize for years of favoritism, but something shifted. They started to at least acknowledge that their treatment of us had been different. Even if they couldn't yet admit that different had meant unfair, it was a start, Emma. And I had continued to grow closer throughout all of this. Watching me navigate family conflict and set boundaries had actually strengthened our relationship. Rather than straining it, she saw me stand up for myself and maintain my principles, even when it was difficult. And I saw her offer unwavering support without trying to fix problems that weren't hers to fix. "I'm proud of how you've handled everything," she told me one evening as we walked around our neighborhood after dinner. "It would have been easier to just accept the status quo and keep the peace." "It would have been easier," I agreed. "It wouldn't have been better." "Do you think your relationship with your parents will ever be what you want it to be?" I considered her question carefully. "I don't think it will ever be what I wanted it to be when I was a kid. But maybe it can become something different that's also good. A relationship between adults who respect each other, even if we don't always agree." That sounds healthy. Feels better than pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. The summer approached, and the school year wound down. Found myself reflecting on the changes that had started with that devastating Christmas morning. It had been one of the worst days of my life, but it had also been the catalyst for some of the best changes I'd ever made. I was no longer the accommodating son who swallowed his disappointment to keep everyone else comfortable. I was no longer the brother who watched inequality in silence. I was no longer the man who accepted crumbs and called them love. Instead, I'd become someone who advocated for himself, set boundaries, and insisted on being treated with basic respect. It was terrifying and liberating and sometimes lonely, but it was also honest in a way my old life had never been. Jessica had become someone I was genuinely proud to call my sister. Not because she had finally met my parents' expectations, but because she had started meeting her own. Watching her grow into her independence had been one of the most rewarding experiences of my adult life. And my parents were slowly learning that their children were adults who deserved to be treated as equals, rather than projects to be managed. It was a difficult adjustment for all of us, but it was necessary. 1 year after that terrible Christmas morning, Jessica and I spent Christmas Eve together in her apartment, cooking dinner and exchanging modest gifts that we had chosen for each other with care and attention. We went to our parents' house on Christmas Day, this time as adults who chose to be there rather than children who felt obligated to be there. When Dad handed me a gift that Christmas, a nice bottle of wine, nothing extravagant, I thanked him sincerely. And when Mom gave Jessica a small, thoughtful present, instead of something expensive and over the top, I saw Jessica's face light up with genuine appreciation. We still had work to do as a family. Years of established patterns don't change overnight. But we were finally having honest conversations about our relationships, instead of pretending that surface harmony was the same thing as genuine love. You know what I've learned this year? Jessica asked, as we drove home from our parents' house that Christmas evening. What's that? I've learned that real love isn't about solving someone's problems for them. It's about believing in their ability to solve problems themselves while offering support along the way. That's very wise. I learned it from watching you. You've been showing me real love all year, even when I didn't deserve it. You always deserved it, Jess. You just needed the chance to earn it for yourself. As we pulled into the parking lot of Jessica's apartment complex, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, genuine contentment with my family relationships. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything was honest. I had spent my entire life trying to earn love by being perfect, helpful, and undemanding. Now I was learning to accept love that was offered freely and to refuse relationships that required me to diminish myself to participate. It was the best Christmas gift I'd ever given myself. To everyone watching this story unfold, I want you to know that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to stop accepting treatment that diminishes your worth. Sometimes setting boundaries isn't about hurting people you love. It's about teaching them how to love you better. If you're struggling with favoritism in your own family, please know that your feelings are valid and your needs matter. You don't have to accept inequality just to keep the peace. You deserve to be valued for who you are. It's not just for how convenient you are. And to those of you who might see yourselves in my parents' position, it's never too late to examine your own behavior and make changes. Love isn't just about intention. About impact. The people you love deserve to feel that love in action, not just in words. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it helps someone else find the courage to advocate for themselves the way I finally learned to advocate for myself. After listening to today's story, perhaps it has raised some new questions in your mind. Every day on Reddit, new experiences and moments create fresh stories. We are all human. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to share it. Thank you for your time, and don't forget to keep an eye out for more stories coming soon.